Hello, good morning. Good morning and welcome. Can you hear me okay? That mic's okay? Yeah, good. Great. My name is Matt Compton. I head up the hybrid infrastructure team here at Bytes, and I have the privilege of hosting today's event. Now, some of you in the room might be wondering, not so much the ones online, why we've asked you to traipse into London, but up the top of a skyscraper, to talk about green IT and sustainability. Well, actually, the Gherkin is one of the most innovative buildings in London. The way it is, it has an aerodynamic shape, means it has about 50% less wind pressure than the standard skyscraper. These windows also act as a heating and cooling system, meaning they absorb heat, warming it for the winter, and are able to extract heat in the summer. So as a whole, this building is about 50% more efficient than the rest of the skyscrapers that sit across London. So there is logic to our madness, and that's why we chose to be here today. We're sponsored by some of our key vendors today that will be speaking after me. Obviously, there's going to be a theme around green IT, but we've selected them all because there's no crossover there. They're all coming from different parts of the IT landscape. It's also an event when we started talking about it 3 or 4 months ago. Every vendor and partner wanted to come and talk to us about their sustainability message. If you go on any vendor website, they will have something around how they are influencing green IT. Now, we've gone through that. Some of them are a little bit more tenuous than others. The guys that we're working on selected today are here because we genuinely believe they make a difference in the way that we innovate our IT platforms moving forward. There is a slight change to the agenda. What? Yeah, no. You take it. Okay. Then it comes away. Unfortunately, Catherine from Microsoft can't be here. She got struck down with COVID. She's not feeling great. So we did try and scramble around last minute to try and get a Microsoft speaker in the sustainability team. We could have got someone doing it remotely. We didn't think it would be right. So Microsoft will not going to be with us today, but you will be sent out a pack next Monday. Catherine or one of the guys on our team are recording a session for us today where you'll have a short video talking through Microsoft and their world and their influence in green IT. So a little change to the agenda that's going to come up on the screen very, very shortly. So Cisco, I'm going to pass to Christian shortly. Then we've got our guest speaker, Ed Gillespie. So I had the privilege of spending some time with Ed a couple of weeks ago to talk about the content that he's going to go through. Ed is a sustainability professional, author, podcast host. Going to really start throwing some things in there to start thinking that's outside of the box. So massively excited for his session before we break for some refreshments and some coffees. Back in the room, we've got iGel, Pure, and Druva, and then because Microsoft's not here, we'll be able to break for lunch slightly earlier than expected. Cool. I've just got one slide. This is the Bytes event, so I wanted to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about Bytes. And we've gone through a similar journey to what most businesses are going through at the moment in terms of our plans to become carbon net zero. At the moment, we've got carbon neutral. How have we done that? Well, our HQs, our bigger offices, are offices that we fully own. So we've had the ability to switch all our energy to renewable sources, which has obviously driven down energy bills quite significantly. We've also, if you go into the offices, I think you see every single colour of the rainbow in terms of the different types of recycling bins that you can go to. And there is a massive push for people to recycle, and if you see people using the general waste bins, then it's a massive slap on the wrist for that. We've also driven our printing down by about 80%, and we've also got sensors across the building that drives down things like lighting, power, so we're making sure it's as efficient as possible. Hybrid working is something that we're really promoting, so our offices are busy, we want to be there, we want to collaborate, but absolutely the fact that we've been able to turn and use platforms across Zoom and Teams to be able to enable meetings across our customer base has been a massive impact to us and other businesses. We will continue to do that. Of course, we want to come and see you. That's why we're hosting today face to face. But there is a time and a place to mix that between the face to face and online. Final bit is we're working really closely with our partner Ecology. Ecology are an organisation that helped us to reduce us down to carbon neutral. So there is investment in terms of planting to get us to that status. And we have plans in place with our targets, both near-term targets and long-term targets, to be carbon net zero by 2040. So with that, hopefully that gives you an idea of kind of what we'll be talking about today. That's all from me. I'll be back potentially before the break. If not, if we get time at the end for a Q&A. So I will hand over to Christian.
Good morning, everyone. Great to be here today. Thanks to Bytes for inviting us, for having us today. And also thanks to everyone here for showing up to come together to talk about and hear about this massively important topic. All right. This massively important topic. Before we start off, so my official title is not related to sustainability. I'm a technical solutions architect. And just maybe with a show of hands, I'll be interested who in this room has an official title related to sustainability. Yeah, I think we are in the same boat mostly, as I can see that. And I think that's great, because I think that's definitely something I can tell, speaking over the last couple of months at some of those similar events, that sustainability really brings different practices together. It's not a topic that can be addressed in silos, but it's really about bringing together different practices. So I think it's great to also see the diversity here. Who is mainly working in the IT function? I see absolute majority. Who is in facilities? Anyone from facilities? All right, over there. So those would be the two main topics I would talk about. So one regarding IT. And if you take something away from the next 25 minutes or so, it's from an IT perspective, to really rethink how you consume technology. So when it's really required to consume it, when does it need to run? And maybe when can you also stop using it? Are there potential hours during the day or during the week when certain functions are not required? So that's number one. Number two is, as you probably all know, energy is getting also massively expensive at the moment, right? So there's the sustainability angle to it, but I'm sure your organizations, the rising energy prices, although, with the government programs, probably no one in this room will really know what the energy price for your business will be in a couple of months. But I think to be more resilient, it is important to set yourself up to be able to reduce energy consumption, for example. Simple ways to reduce a carbon footprint can be also the energy bill. Before I get to that, I wanted to give you a brief overview about what Cisco is doing to advance sustainability. We are doing sustainability reporting already for more than a decade, around 15 years. And it's really an integral part of who we are. Our purpose is power an inclusive future for all, and an environment where everyone can thrive is an important part of that. Otherwise, it will not be possible. So I just want to give a brief overview. So our net zero target, which we want to achieve by 2040, has been approved by the Science Based Targets initiative, which was a very important milestone for us to hit. That our plans are in line with basically the Paris Agreement to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees. So that's, especially for an organization from the scale and size of Cisco, a very important thing we wanted to achieve. Then we worked together with multiple organizations in and around sustainability, CDP, for example, where we report our carbon footprint, MSCI, also the Responsible Business Alliance from a supply chain perspective. So really also using, the ecosystem aspect there and approach there to bring companies together and also be as transparent as possible about our sustainability. Another aspect I want to highlight is that we also invest in different initiatives. For example, if you have a great idea, I can really encourage you, which would be advancing sustainability, to, for example, participate in the Global Problem Solver Challenge, where we put out prize money for new ideas, innovation in the area of sustainability. So, if someone is here having a breakthrough idea, make sure that you participate in that. Then lastly for this slide, and also that's something we work increasingly on with our partners, is the take back and recycle aspect, so the responsible treatment of IT components and IT hardware. And actually 99.9% of what is getting back to us in terms of hardware is either being reused or recycled. So only a very small amount of what ends up to return to Cisco can't be reused or recycled. We also launched a take-back or a environmental sustainability specialization for partners, where I'm really happy to say that Bytes also achieved this certification to demonstrate and show that also this topic advanced from that perspective. Really brief overview, also for your reference, later on, what our public sustainability commitments are, our targets over the next couple of years. So there's a lot on there on reducing waste, for example, more circular design elements in our products. Actually, the sustainability of a product is massively influenced in the design phase. It's actually very difficult to make a product which was not designed for sustainability and for circularity sustainable in the end. So we have targets, for example, to add circular design principles for all of our new products by 2025, which is a very important milestone for us to hit. Another one which is interesting for you as a customer or potential customer is that by 2030 we want to reduce the impact of the use of our products by 30%, which is also the use of our products is the majority of our carbon footprint. So if you look at Cisco overall and how our carbon footprint looks like, only 1% or less than 1% actually are our direct emissions. Everything else is indirect. And the majority of that is the use of our products. So that's a very important milestone to hit. And then also to point this out, a couple of years ago, we made a pledge to take back 100% of our products and equipment free of charge as well. So it will be responsibly recycled. You will get a certificate that it has been treated properly at the end of its life. Also, the consumption models is also something that is changing. So I think the way you consume technology and also having the security that if you already in the procurement phase purchase new products, that you know already that it will be treated accordingly to circular principles. And there's a program that was launched by Cisco Capital called Greenpay, where it's basically a circular approach, an integral part of this program. So you know already that at the end of the usage phase, you need to get it back. So that's important for us because we want to increase the amount of equipment we get back to us. And at the end of the usage, when you feed it back, you will get a certificate that it entered the circular economy. Right, so far for the pretext, goals, targets, what we are doing. I want to get now to the solution aspect because that's also a very important pillar for us to think, how can our technology help to reduce carbon footprint, to reduce energy consumption? And specifically for our using our Cisco Meraki cloud platform here as an example, we kind of looked at what capabilities do we have on the platform and which sustainable outcomes can be achieved. And we found that they are mostly in 3 different areas. Energy savings, which is probably the most obvious one when you think about technology, that energy savings can be related to that. But then also reducing waste, which is maybe not as obvious, which is largely achieved through the usage of our IoT portfolio and sensors. But then also reducing travel. Probably everyone in this room, as we said already, this is also a hybrid event. So the possibility to participate remotely, but also to use IoT and sensors to get information about remote spaces without actually being there is also an important aspect of that outcome. So zooming in a little bit on the energy savings side, as said, Cisco Meraki is a cloud platform. All right, energy savings. So as I said, Cisco Meraki is a cloud platform, which means that many functions that are traditionally on-premise are not required on-prem anymore. When you think about network management systems, for example, but also on the IoT side, video recorders, video management systems, IoT gateways for sensors, where we reuse existing components and you don't need dedicated components. All this reduces the footprint on the site. But then HVAC efficiency, heating and cooling, so heating, ventilation, air conditioning, this whole area is a massively important focus for us. And also in buildings, heating and air conditioning is the majority of energy consumption, which is contributed to. So it's also infrastructure and other elements, but those components usually make up the majority of energy consumption. So I have a use case and dedicated slide for that, so we'll come back to this. Then power over Ethernet energy savings. In general, smart buildings are a very important aspect in the sustainability context. Commercial buildings make up 6% or even a bit more than 6% of global emissions. And actually 80% of buildings that have been built today will still be around 2050. So 2050, when we kind of, as a community, as a global community, want to achieve net zero, 80% of the buildings we have today will still be around then. Which means that we need to think about, on one hand side, the new aspect, how to build new buildings sustainable, but also the retrofit aspect. So the existing spaces we have, how do we make them more sustainable to achieve zero by then? And power over Ethernet is a great way to use it in new buildings, but also existing ones. PoE, when you use PoE for lighting, for example, it is a lot more efficient than traditional energy infrastructure, power infrastructure, because you have less loss from an energy perspective, but also using less material, less steel, less iron, for example. But then you have also the capability, very easy with PoE, to get better visibility. So you can see, for example, our access points connected via PoE, digital signage connected via PoE, IP phones, meeting room tablets, desks. So there are a lot of devices that you can power via PoE meanwhile. So you get a way more granular visibility compared to when you just look at your energy meter. You know, when you look at your energy meter, everything gets mixed up together on a floor or building level. But PoE, you can see it granularly per device what your consumption is. But I will also offer a dedicated slide for that. Automation is something we do inherently. So most things, or sometimes even more capabilities, are available via API. So everything can be integrated also to external systems. And automation usually means efficiency. And whatever can be automated, often efficiency means sustainability. So looking at reducing the manual effort and reducing the steps in the process can also have positive outcomes. Then the reducing waste assets, so that's mostly a use case for our IoT portfolio. So protecting perishable goods, for example, where we work together with pharmacies during the height of the COVID pandemic to just protect vaccines, because they are also sensitive to temperature changes. And whenever we protect something from going to waste, that is sustainable, because it can fulfill its intended purpose. You don't need to replace it with new products or new material. And the material that got to waste doesn't need to be disposed of. There are a lot of positive knock-on effects to protect what you have, and that's true for perishable goods, for food, for example, or medical equipment, but also for business assets, infrastructure. So when you, for example, think of a comms room, and you have a failure with the HVAC system, with the air conditioning, you might only recognize that when it's too late, when your devices in that room starts to fail, when they overheat. But having a tighter visibility from sensors in that room to be notified early on that there is a problem from an environmental perspective, which will maybe empower you to still save it, because you're notified early, you don't need to react when the device itself is a little overheating. Yeah, then reduce travel. Where our cloud management plays a role, remote management. So when you think about how networks are managed traditionally, there are a lot of functions where you need to go on site to do that, like a packet capture, for example, for troubleshooting purposes, or a cable test. And there are now capabilities that can be done remotely, so you just reduce the need to go on site. Also zero-touch deployment in the implementation phase already. Being able to just send the device from the distribution center to the end location where it's being installed without steps in between, so that you don't need to stage it somewhere, you just send it to the final destination where it's being implemented. And then, as I said, everything around hybrid work to reduce the need to travel for meetings, for example, but also cameras and sensors to get information about remote spaces. I spoke to a customer a few months ago about this aspect to use cameras and sensors for data centers, because they are doing audits in their global data centers multiple times per year. So they are sending people with a clipboard and just a few checkboxes if, for example, all doors are closed, if all lights are on, and so on. And people need to travel literally around the globe multiple times per year. We are now evaluating if we can make some of those tasks with IoT so that the need is reduced to do this manually on site. All right, wanted to zoom in a little bit, and that's now kind of what I talked about here. I know you need to switch the slides also, but I need to switch one more slide. So what we talked about here is the what, right? So what can you do to advance sustainability and achieve sustainable outcomes? Now I want to talk more about the how. And when we look at sustainability and sustainability challenges around this, what needs to happen in the first place is you need to do a discovery. You need to measure, you need to collect data, you need to get an understanding about what is the current infrastructure, what is the current footprint, what is the current energy consumption. So that you can also see, is there a possibility for optimization or not? But you don't know what you don't know. So doing the discovery is very important. And how we support here is that you, for example, at any given time, can see what is the PoE power usage across your whole infrastructure to see what is the baseline, where are we starting from. But then also understanding your spaces, because maybe when you think about, as I said before, maybe there's a potential to switch off functions outside of the business and office hours. Maybe you know already that after 6 p.m., for example, no one is there, and you just know that. And if you know it, that's great. So you can implement directly policies to switch off certain components. But maybe especially if you have multiple sites, you need to still understand when are people present, for example. And you get this information when you use physical security cameras on our platform. You can also see how many people are present in any of those sites. So you can know, for example, that in a site in London, after 6 p.m., no one is there, and you can safely switch off certain capabilities and build the schedule accordingly. But then also understanding the network, so a bit more from an abstract perspective, one layer up, and 2 layers up from the physical one, to see when are clients, network clients, Wi-Fi clients connecting to different networks, to understand when is really the infrastructure in use, and when is there potential to switch off components to save energy. All right, so we did the discovery. Now, what can be done actually to reduce the consumption? First is switchboard schedules for PoE, where, as I said, you can turn off Wi-Fi. I mean, quite the conversations I have, I think Wi-Fi most of the time today is turned on 24/7, especially in business environments. But actually, there's often not the need to talk. So you can switch off Wi-Fi, for example, out of business hours to save energy. And just as an example, if you have 2,000 access points spread across multiple locations, and you switch them off for 10 hours per day, you would save £100,000 over 5 years just by doing that. So just by switching it off when you don't need it, which is a very simple way to achieve savings. Also where you can save energy and money, so costs from today, basically. Another example is in comms rooms. So as I said, HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. So really getting a granular understanding about what is the temperature distribution in those spaces. And where are pockets of hot air, for example, where is it maybe also too cold? If you need to wear a thick jacket when you walk into a data center or comms room, it's probably too cold. So there are best practices from ASHRAE, for example, where you can see that you can safely increase the temperature, so you can save on energy, but you're still not risking that your components are damaged. But every degree you're not cooling down leads to energy savings. There are some ballpark figures, between 4 and 5% is what you sometimes hear can be saved per degree of temperature that is increased in such an environment. But not only data centers, we hear about regulations in some European countries, for example, that in shops or public offices, you need now to adhere to certain temperature thresholds, so not heat warmer than 19 degrees, for example. And how do you get the visibility? How do you see how warm is it in those spaces today at scale across multiple sites, so that you can get the understanding and then also on it. Just an example from a customer that uses or adopted this use case and the outcomes they achieved. So a global digital marketing firm adopted those sensors, and in the location where they implemented it first, they achieved now, because of the visibility they got there, they were able to redesign the layout of the data center and also implement further measures to optimize the airflow in those data centers, but only because they saw granularly in every rack on the cold and hot side what is the actual temperature there. And now, following on the visibility, they were able to achieve $70,000 in that case, and 175 tons of CO2 reductions per year, because they were able to increase the temperature in those spaces. Closing the loop, it's also what I learned in conversations recently. It's as important to make the change, but to also to report on it. Because what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. So, and also closing the loop to understand you implemented something, you made a change to save energy, but then also understanding how much did I save actually? Did I achieve my target? Did I achieve my goal? Maybe you as an IT function have also a target in your organization that you need to reduce your energy consumption overall by 10%, for example. And how do you track this? And here are some ways to do that. As I said, for POE, for example, that's the easiest case. So you can see in a dashboard directly after you implemented the schedule, what is the new consumption? And you can also measure it. You can see the kilowatt hours that are being reduced, so you can see directly what the outcome is. But also, as I said, APIs is a very important aspect for us, so that you can also get this data and feed it into external systems, carbon accounting tools, for example, building management systems, because you probably want to process the data not only in our dashboard, but also in others. All right, that was my part for today. As I said, two main takeaways. Rethink how you use IT infrastructure. Is there potential to turn off functions outside business hours? Do a POC, don't go all in at once. Select 2 or 3 sites, test it out, do user acceptance testing. All those things can be done. And the second one is heating, ventilation, air conditioning consumes an incredible amount of energy. And I think also IT and facilities probably needs to work together there a bit closer than traditionally. So I think that's another takeaway. Don't be shy and collaborate with your workmates. If you want to know more, the ESG Hub and the Cisco website, you can see all the data, all the targets, everything I talked about initially, and about the use cases. You can go to the graph.
Good morning. There we go. Hello, everyone. My name's Ed Gillespie, and I'm here going to talk to you about the climate crisis and how it's connected into ICT and data storage in particular. And then I'm going to bring it right back around to show how data is also helping us to resolve some elements of the climate crisis. Now, I've been working on this for 25 years now, half my adult life. I always joke that when I first started working on climate change, it was a bit like waxing yourself while I was wearing a dark suit. No one noticed, but it gave me a warm feeling inside. Now we say it's like teenage sex. Everyone says they're doing it. Very few people actually are. And those who are doing it are doing it quite badly. And these are all jokes, but I'm an environmentalist, so I recycle them over and over. So data is a climate question, is where I want to take you this morning. And I want to begin with a sort of quite a serious note, because I think apart from the chronic human tragedy and carnage of the war in Ukraine, what it's really reinforced is the connectedness of our world, the interdependencies and the interconnectedness, not least being manifested through cost of living crisis and the energy crisis, but also the global food crisis, which is coming out of this conflict. And so it's showing us how inextricably linked our fates are. And when you look around the world and you look at some of the things that we've all had in terms of our own living experience in recent months, particularly the 40+ degrees temperatures that hit the UK this year, it can feel a bit like an apocalypse. And that's even without getting into politics. But what I mean this is not the Armageddon sense of the word, in terms of the end of the world, but actually in the true etymology of apocalypse, which is the drawing back of the veil, the uncovering, to see the awkward and uncomfortable truth in the way that the world is run. And I'm going to focus a bit on data in regard to that. Now, my job as a futurist is not to predict and analyse existing trends, but to try and stretch the imagination of the possible. And in order to do that, you've got to listen to the real questions that the future is asking of you. That is our responsibility and our duty, is to listen to the real questions the future is asking of us. Now, I speak at a lot of events, not always in such glorious locations as this. This was a lawnmower conference I spoke at recently. I get all the glamour gigs. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a 125-mile-an-hour lawnmower. I don't know what question these guys think the future is asking, but I'm pretty sure it's not, where's my 125-mile-an-hour lawnmower? And the questions that I want to put to you are the ones that I work on in the podcast that I do with comedian John Richardson, my fellow reluctant futurist Mark Stevenson. And in John Richardson and the Futurenauts, we take a different topic every week, and we ask 3 questions. How effed are we? Why are we effed? And how do we un-eff ourselves? And so that's the structure I'm going to use for the rest of this talk. So, in terms of the climate crisis, how effed are we? Well, the answer is fair. Basically, we've gone from sort of hard denial, going, no, it's not really real, is it, to the sort of soft denial, well, it's not real, it's not, might be real, but it's not us, to, we're right in the middle of this as a genuine crisis and emergency. And I put it to you that we tell ourselves 3 key comfortable myths when it comes to climate. 1, we feel like we know what's going on, what's likely to happen over the next 5 to 15 years. Secondly, that we have a sense of control, and whatever happens, we'll find a way to tame it. And thirdly, we understand what leadership will be required. And emphasis on the last line, and I'm confident that our decision-making institutions are up to the job. I don't know how confident you're feeling about our decision-making institutions right now. Personally, I have a few doubts. But if you haven't read the 3,000 pages of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, let me praise it for you. 34,000 studies, 1,000 scientists, unanimously approved by 195 governments. It's unequivocally us. What we're doing is unprecedented, and indeed some of the changes we've set in train are both inevitable and irreversible on human timescales. And the question the future is asking us now is how hot are we going to allow it to get? Because it's only going to get hotter from here on in. We've had the 7 hottest years on record, have been in the last 7 years. We've added 1.1 degree of climate change since 1850. It's only going in one direction. Our challenge is what point are we going to try and limit it? And what is happening in the weather system is essentially as you add more heat into it, it becomes more turbulent. It basically becomes more violent and extreme. So we have more heat waves, but we also have intensification of cyclones. The hurricane hit Florida this week. We also get very localized, intense precipitation events with a whole month of rain in one place at one day. But at the same time, you also get droughts in these longer fire seasons. The world has been burning from California to Greece to Australia to the Amazon. So all of this is just increased turbulence, and all of that has financial costs. And often these are infrastructural costs caused by the damage by these extreme events. Swiss Re, based in this building, have also said that the frequency and severity of these events is leading us towards a potentially uninsurable world, where actually the premiums in order to defend ourselves from these types of damage start to become untenable. And if you want to have a bit of a clarification, basically our policies and actions at the moment on climate change are taking us to a world of somewhere between 2.5 and 3 degrees. Now that is pretty catastrophic if you happen to live anywhere across the middle of the planet where life is already quite hot. Where we have to be is on the Paris Agreement 1.5 degree trajectory, which is the green line. And the thing that should be sharpening all of our minds is that there is a 20 gigaton ambition gap of carbon emissions cuts that we have to make by the end of this decade, which is effectively, in layman's terms, is a 50% cut in emissions by 2030. That's on all of our watches. So that's part of our job, is to deliver that 50% cut in the next 8 years. And Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, says, we're on a pathway to global warming right now, which is double where we should be, as I was showing on the previous graph. Some governments, business leaders are saying one thing but doing another. Simply put, they are lying. And the results will be catastrophic. Delay is death. Already 400,000 people a year are being killed by climate-related events and impacts. So this is a risk multiplier that's not yet factored into our decision-making. And it's arguably the greatest risk management failure in history, because we've seen it coming for so long. I've been working on it for 25 years. Some of the big oil businesses knew about it in the 50s. The Institute of Internal Auditors says this is a principal and forever risk, i.e. it is essential organising risk, and it's not going away. So where does this all impact on the world of big data? I mean, we are living in the data explosion. I don't need to remind you guys about this, but we've got over half the world online now in some way, shape or form, whether it's via their mobile devices or a classic computer. But the fact is, we've now got billions of people online. That has obviously rocketed from just over 2 billion 10 years ago in 2012. Do you remember 2012? I remember 2012. Life felt very different in 2012. But now we're at almost 5 billion users globally. So we have an enormous power which is emerging here. You'll be familiar with Metcalfe's law, which is the value of a telecommunications network is proportional to the square of the number of connected users in the system, i.e. it becomes more valuable the more connected everyone becomes. You'll also appreciate the use of the skewable here of a nice old vintage telephone to illustrate the different nodes of the network. If you look at a map of the internet, the kind of stylized graphic representation, it doesn't look dissimilar to the connections in the human brain. Like we have this emergent property which should hopefully lead to some form of collective intelligence. We're not there quite yet, I don't think. But what is also happening, as I'm sure you're all acutely aware, is this gargantuan collection and aggregation and generation of data. And it doesn't matter which of the different platforms we're looking at, but every minute of every day, there are literally tens of millions of different things, photos, files, images being shared across the internet. And that has obviously begun to grow exponentially. We're now it's 2.5 quintillion bytes of data a day. That's 10 to the power 18, for those of you of a mathematical persuasion. Now, I'm old enough, at the age of 50, to remember the ZX81. Clive Sinclair's groundbreaking computer with a working memory of 1K, which was obviously a fantastic innovation at the time. My microphone's falling off. And we're starting to get into the territory now where the words we're using are starting to fail us. So, we're now starting to look at using words like zillion, quintillion. They don't seem to mean anything to people. And one of the reasons we're doing this, I've suddenly become incredibly loud, haven't I? You see it. That's better. Thank you. Is we have this attitude that data is the new oil. And we're terrified about deleting it. We want to hang on to it because it's perceived to have all this inherent value that we must exploit in some way, shape, or form. But the trouble is, the generation of that data is now out of control. If you go back to 2016, the prediction of where we would be in 2020 was about 40 zettabytes of data. And Evangelos Savoulis said, as more data is being generated, what we've become is better at managing its cost effectively, but we're still struggling to actually efficiently analyze and use it in any meaningful way. So, again, 2016 prediction was we would be at 40 zettabytes by 2020. The reality in 2020 was we were at 64 zettabytes, 50% more than we were anticipating. And that is predicted to grow to 180 zettabytes in the next 3 years. So a further tripling of this gargantuan amount of data storage is out of control. And what we're entering now is the zettabyte era, which is, if we're doing our 10 to the power, it's 10 to the power 21. 1 sextillion bytes are equivalent to about 1 trillion gigabytes. What are we doing with all this data? Why are we storing it? And why are we not doing something about it? Well, partly, we're all familiar with Moore's law. It's to do with the fact that we've just got far more powerful computer processing capacities and abilities right now. But it's also that the cost of storage has absolutely plummeted. So if you go back to those ZX81 days, in 1980, it cost you $1 million to store 1 gigabyte of data. $1 million, can you imagine that? And now it's a fraction of a cent. And so it's become too cheap. And so we just blindly continue to store it. It's also to do with the fact that the number of things that we're connecting to the internet is also exploding. So the Internet of Things is predicted to be up to 25 billion objects and items connected by the end of the decade. And again, starting to take off and grow in uncontrollable ways. There are some things which just should not be connected to the internet. If you want to share the temperature of your bum with the world, that's entirely up to you. But we're not doing this with intelligence. We're just simply connecting things and collecting the data because we can. And that's meaning there's an absolute tsunami of data coming through. And only a fraction of that, unfortunately, is being powered by renewable energy at this stage. And that has to change. Because we know that this impact is also being replicated in things like Bitcoin. We know that Bitcoin's electricity consumption at 150 terawatt hours a year, roughly the same as the electricity consumption in the Netherlands. Ethereum has apparently just fixed part of their problem by rather than using mining and proof of work, but using a completely different mechanism in order to justify. They claim to have cut their carbon emissions by about 99%. But we've still got these incredible footprints going on. If you look at the scenarios we're facing, the ICT energy forecast, if you like, is now predicting, in the best case scenario, in our leanest scenario, using about 8% of global electricity by the end of the decade. However, what is far more likely and more expected is that it will hit around 20% of global electricity demand in the next 8 years, 40,000 terawatt hours a year. So let's come back to those comfortable myths and say, actually, we face 3 uncomfortable truths. One, that there's a whole bunch of stuff coming down the track that we're going to find hard to handle, particularly in terms of the volatility of the climate. Secondly, that we're not in control. And arguably, we're actually out of control. And thirdly, that leadership is going to be just part of the mix of responsible organising. Because we're going to have to become much more informed and intelligent data citizens, taking some responsibility for our own data in a way that we're currently not. I mean, the average person has about 2,000 photos on their phone, which I'm fully doing not a lot with. And my favourite stat that I'll just share with Matt beforehand is every year, how many photos do you think are taken every year now? Anyone wants to have a guess? Have a guess. How many photos taken around the world every year? 20 billion, higher?
A trillion.
Higher than a trillion? No, it's now we're getting crazy. 1.7 trillion photos a year. And some people are saying, actually, that's more than all the photos taken in human history. It's not. They reckon about 12 trillion photos have been taken in the 200 years since the camera was first invented. But 1.7 trillion photos a year. And growing again, almost exponentially. So, why are we effed? Well, we sort of started to touch on this. But we need to understand that we get into a lot of this stuff often with good intentions. And partly, it's because climate change as a challenge is not like conventional challenges. It's not like the ozone layer we can fix with one piece of legislation and remove chlorofluorocarbons through something like the Montreal Protocol. It's complicated. It's got multiple sources and factors. It's not like a war, because it's a war on us, because we're all on multiple sides at the same time. It's also not like an asteroid coming at us as some terrible intergalactic accident, because it's got a history and vested interests. So climate change is not a problem, it's actually a predicament. And it's here, it's us, it's here, and it's now. And you might have seen the Netflix movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, Don't Look Up, when everyone's talking about, refusing people to that. We don't believe the asteroid is coming. We don't want to look up. And this is totally our looking up moment. And every sector is responsible in this. And ICT is absolutely no exception. So one of the reasons we've got into this mess is because of the exponential impact of what we can call the great acceleration. So I don't put too many graphs in my presentation, and I cheat. I put 24 on one slide. But what I'm pointing out here is it doesn't matter which of these, whether it's world population, primary energy use, my old job as a marine biologist and marine fish catcher, you'll see all of these graphs go exponential at about the same time, which is 1950. So since 1950 is when things have started to run out of control, which is why when you talk to people of a certain generation, they don't appreciate that they grew up in a world of absolute plenty, and we are now entering a world of relative constraint. And this is the bit that we have to sort of try and rationalise. As Professor Johan Rockström from the Stockholm Resilience says, the planet is starting to send back invoices to the economy. Because we've been living on an ecological debt and a natural capital that we have depleted. And this is where we're going to have to change. The internet is massive in terms of the carbon footprint. It's about 3.7% of global emissions. It's bigger than aviation, bigger than all global aviation. And if you separated out the global IT sector as an electricity consumer, it would be second in terms of electricity demand behind China and the US. So, again, it's a massive consumer of electricity. That comes from two different components: the manufacturing and shipping of all of that technology and all of that hardware, but also, as Christian was very articulately describing, all of the heating and cooling and powering of the electricity involved in that ICT world. And as Joey McGovern, author of Worldwide Base, says, we've got to remind ourselves constantly, especially in this era of the cloud, that digital is physical. Digital is not innately green. Digital, in actual fact, will end up costing us the earth unless we continually remind ourselves that somewhere there is hardware and physical assets and huge energy demand going on behind all this beautiful, brilliant technology that we have developed. The cloud makes it feel ethereal, but it's got huge physical and substantive impacts. And coming back to the data, we are tolerating a level of 90% waste. Think of any industry now that would tolerate 90% waste. We wouldn't. It would be publicly unacceptable. Around 90% of data is never accessed 3 months after it was first stored. 90%. Businesses only analyse around 10% of the data they collect. So we're only just focusing in on a very, very small amount. And thirdly, 90% of all sensor data collected from the Internet of Things devices is never used full stop. So this gargantuan growth, which has a huge energy footprint and carbon implications contributing to the climate crisis and emergency, is largely pointless. That's the sobering reality. And then we talk about the metaverse and the processing capacity and data storage which is going to be required to power that. And you start to think this is actually a moment of total insanity. Particularly if the metaverse just ends up being the worst representation of all the terrible things that go on the diversity of the internet already. Now, the positive side of this, because I hear people saying, okay, actually it's fine because all of this is going to be powered by renewables. Yes, the big green bang has already started. Renewable energy is taking off. We are putting more and more renewable energy in place. And that's critical, especially in the context of the gas crisis, the energy crisis triggered by what's happening in Ukraine. We definitely need to move ourselves away from conflict energy coming from fossil fuels, especially as 75% of Russia's export income comes from oil and gas. So they've earned $3.5 trillion in the last 8 years from those exports. And so one thing we do for our energy security and our energy sustainability and stability is to get ourselves off fossil fuels full stop. And ICT has a great role in pioneering that. But the sobering point to remember is that in 2009, 80.3% of the global energy mix was fossil fuels. In 2019, it was 80.2%. So in 10 years, we took 0.1% of fossil fuels out of the global energy mix. So even though renewables have been growing 3 times faster than fossil fuels, 5 versus 1.7%, global energy demand has also increased, also driven by global demand in ICT, and almost all of our renewable energy is just additional to the existing fossil fuels. It hasn't displaced any fossil fuels. It's just our bigger appetite is being met and that growth is being met through renewables. So we're still burning more fossil fuels than ever before. We have to stop doing the bad stuff. It's not enough just to do the good stuff on top. And actually, some of the biggest ICT companies, or the biggest digital businesses, have an even bigger problem. Because they are such huge cash generators, their cash invested in the financial system is actually got a bigger carbon footprint than their business activities themselves. If you like, their kind of scope 3+ responsibility. So if you look at a business like PayPal, which is the top one in, has very, very low reported carbon emissions, but actually its cash and investments, because it's got billions in the bank, its financed emissions are something like 5,500% bigger than the actual footprint of the business itself. So where we put our money matters, and increasingly we're seeing that businesses which have got large amounts of cash liquidity, which often happens in the digital world, their impact is bigger in terms of their investment than in terms of their business. So where does the kind of solution come out of this? Because right now, we're sort of faced with the potential for breakdown. And change as usual is not going to be enough. What we need to be seeking and actively getting excited about is breakthrough. Because I'd say 2012 feels like a long time ago when we all stood and watched what happened in the Olympic Stadium just down the road there, and Tim Berners-Lee took the stage to say, you know, the gift of the internet is something for everyone. But as Tim says now, for all the good we've achieved, the web has evolved into an engine of inequity and division, swayed by powerful forces who use it for their own agendas. And something has to give. So I challenge you to overcome all of our own willful blindness, which is actually a legal principle that you're responsible if you could have known, or indeed should have known, something which instead you strove not to see. And it's like a mirror moment. When we look in the mirror, do we see a narcissistic self-love, or do we see a cathartic capacity to change? And I want to finish on a sort of upbeat note about how we might unearth ourselves. So, firstly, it's about overcoming this honesty gap. It's actually confronting the reality, looking at the data, trying to do something about it, avoiding this sort of 90% waste. That's going to require a cultural shift, because every data scientist and data manager is going to have to be trained differently in terms of being much more ruthless in terms of what's collected and why. We also have to address inequality. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that actually the best way to generate climate resilience against climate chaos is to reduce inequality, whether it's ethnic, gender, age, or geographical location or income. All of that means breaking the silence, the mafia omerta, the kind of code of silence, speaking out and being more vocal about these issues in our decision-making and beginning to tackle the risk head-on. Because the race to net zero is pretty much agreed. You know, the UK has a net zero target which is legally binding on governments to hit net zero by 2050. Indeed, a 78% reduction by 2035. So there's some pretty radical legislation already in place if you need a reference point for your own policy initiatives. There's some also positivity in the fact that while we have grown internet traffic and data center workloads, data center energy use has also plateaued. So we've used up a lot of our efficiency potential by driving down the cost of energy of those kind of impacts. So there's some positivity there. And also, many of the big players have also committed to carbon neutrality or actually carbon negativity in the case of Microsoft, looking at offsetting or drawing down all its historical emissions. And all of these initiatives are really important because they're starting to change the game. I am, again, old enough to remember the UK's first wind turbine. I worked up in Orkney, where that turbine on the left, which is both biggest. This is the Burgess Hill turbine. 2 blades, concrete tower. When this thing started spinning, you can hear it about 5 miles away. It's been knocked down since. But this was where wind power was 30 years ago. I was working up there in the 90s. Now we're at 15 megawatt turbines. It's as big as where's the shark? There somewhere. The new generation of offshore wind turbines going in are as big as the shark, generating 15 megawatts of power. They are absolutely massive. The International Energy Agency says that wind power could meet the entire world's electricity needs 18 times over. So this is an enormous resource, and data is going to be critical for integrating all of this renewable energy into our grid-based system. Google's DeepMind has been working using machine learning to predict wind power outputs 36 hours ahead. So actually looking at and understanding the predictability of renewable energy, which is absolutely fundamental to using it most efficiently and effectively. One thing we have learned through this energy crisis is that fossil fuels are incredibly price volatile and their supply is intermittent. You know, those are the two things which have always been level renewable energy. And now the tables have turned. Renewable energy is starting to be the thing we can rely on and can be price predictable. So by using data smartly, we can also then maximize the financial value of the kilowatt hours which are generated by renewable energy. And what DeepMind is doing is enabling us to maximize that economic return. And even smarter are people like Open Climate Fix, which is actually started by some people who came out of Google DeepMind, where they're looking at mapping the entire solar array of the UK. So every single solar power panel in the country, and overlaying that with weather data and cloud cover to, again, give this very short-term predictability of what is likely to be generated by the UK solar grid. So we're starting to have this really smart, valuable use of data. And what that means is if you know how much energy is likely to be coming from your solar and wind arrays and supplies, it means you can turn down the spinning reserve of fossil fuel gas, which still makes up about half UK energy. So data can be used brilliantly and incisively in order to make a massive difference. Where it gets really exciting, and in the same way that Moore's law has a sort of logarithmic relationship with the increasing amount of computer capacity, what we're seeing in batteries is a similar thing, as a decline in cost of lithium-ion batteries. And that is the missing link, if you like, in a solar wind battery power grid, our future energy system, which will not be based on fracking. Thank you, Jacob Rees-Mogg. But what we're seeing is the role of the electric vehicle, and again, smart use of data here. When you have 1 million electric vehicles on the road, you have a national battery, which you can then incentivize people to charge up when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing. New electric vehicles contain enough battery capacity to run a traditional, conventional home for somewhere between 3 and 5 days. So you might not be running and charging your car off your house. You might well be running your house off the car. And so you can imagine how these three things integrate. And that data insight and exchange is going to be absolutely critical. People say you should think about the electric vehicle as the coal truck of the 21st century, as a way of storing and distributing energy to people's houses. And that comes back to our friend Bob Metcalfe and what he talks about as the Internet, which is a decentralized, two-way dynamic energy system. PICLO is one of the projects which has been pioneering these type of mechanisms, bringing millions of energy generators into the mix. So we're not just having a big, centralized, one-directional, linear energy system where we burn stuff in a big shed and send it down cables at high voltage, but actually we get into a much more nuanced two-way exchange. That peer-to-peer energy trading is also happening, and the smart money is also moving into the control of those grids. China has been quietly investing into energy grids around the world, because who runs the grid is going to help control the supply and the distribution and the profitability of that energy. And we're heading to a world also in which we can all be producers as well as customers of energy. So rather than being sat there passively at the end of a linear pipe where you get foisted with a bill and you have no alternative but to pay, we should see a levelling of the playing field where we all become active owners and participants in a collectively owned electricity system which is renewable and green. Now, isn't that efficient? We might actually get excited. So there's also wonderful stuff going on in terms of search. Ecosia, the search engine you'll probably be familiar with, is quietly planting nearly 150 million trees off the back of people's search. So you can have a green search power if you go down that particular route. And I think you can find umpteen examples. I mean, one of the joys of my job is I get to see all of these projects and meet the people who are behind some of these innovations. Because as the sci-fi writer William Gibson said, the future's out there, it's just not evenly distributed yet. Unfortunately, the collapse is also out there, it's just not evenly distributed yet. So I'll finish on a kind of notion that we often talk about this stuff as sort of saving the planet. And I put it to you, the planet doesn't want to be saved or rescued or even changed. What the planet should be is appreciated and perhaps even loved a bit for all the kind of incredible gifts that she gives to us. And I think there are two types of organisations increasingly that we experience now. There are the brave, who can see the trailblazing, pioneering direction we have to go in order to deliver a very different system. And then there are dead, for those who are foot dragging and following the vested interests and slowing the pace of change. The big fossil fuel giants, as I mentioned earlier, they knew what was happening with the climate system from their own science back in the 1950s. And they have effectively delivered the slightly compromised climate world we are now having to reconcile. I think also, in some ways, the big digital giants now are also fully aware that the commoditisation of data and the translation of that has led to all of the political schisms and divisions and the culture wars that we are also experiencing right now, with again taking not enough responsibility for their actions. So we've got to be pretty careful as we try and build our economy that we don't end up in a sort of Darth Vader scenario where the construction of our new Death Star is an amazing job creation opportunity, because that's what, when we get the growth mantra. My challenge to you is that all of our investment of time or money now should be trying to centre human health or the environment in some way. So when we're making these big ICT investment decisions, we should be trying to make sure that we're doing the right thing by heading towards net zero and looking after people along the way. Because anything that isn't that is a cost on the future, and arguably it's theft from the future, because it's not an investment. And I always go back to my old colleague, Margaret Heffernan, at the Forward Institute, where we work on responsible leadership, who said the truth won't set us free until we develop the skills, the habit, the talent, perhaps most importantly, the moral courage to use it. I believe this is a moment of moral courage. Because we're going to circle right back to those questions that the future is asking of us, those big, burning questions that the ones that we all have to wrangle with collectively and collaboratively, is that the wisdom of the past is only going to get us so far, and it's the brave who really learn from that future. A lot of this might sound difficult or impossible, but right now, only the impossible is interesting. Thank you very much.
So we've got we've got a couple of minutes. We've got a couple of minutes or so, so we're going to open it up to questions.
Also for the previous part, maybe if there are any questions.
This one. Questions?
Also for the previous part.
Also for Chris's session as well. Okay, I've got a question if I'll get things off. If we're able to meet the Paris Agreement,
Well, I mean, the big question there. We don't know. I mean, the Paris Agreement is based on a risk assessment, which says it gives us the best chance of avoiding some of the tipping points of the system. But it's not a guaranteed safety point, it's the complexities involved. What we know is that every time we lose a percentage of the grid, it's going to get more risky. So if we're really pragmatic, we've probably lost 1.5 degrees. I don't think we're going to make 1.5 degrees. But every ton of carbon that doesn't go into the atmosphere now alleviates future human suffering in some way, shape or form. So if we don't get 1.5 degrees, we should aim at 1.6. If we start at 1.2, we have to aim for 1.7. Every point of a degree really matters, because that will be paid for in lives and stuff. So, yeah, 1.5 is just enough. But again, that doesn't eliminate the risk. I think it gives us a kind of, 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 chance of hopefully avoiding tipping points which might lead to rising climate change.
Final mundane question. How warm can we let our server get?
I won't give you a straight answer on the degree level. No, but I think there are best practices.
Yeah.
So there are best practices from ASHRAE, for example, which you can follow. So there are different data center classes. They kind of recommend. So A1 to A5 required, but A1 to A4 are sort of the prominent ones. And there are different ranges, between like degrees, I think around 17, and the upper end goes up until 30 even or something like that. So, but I think, that's something we need to assess for sort of the environment you have, the type of data center, the layout, also, which functionalities do you have? Do you, for example, feed cold air from the outside when the outside temperature is lower than the inside one? So that's something we see now increasingly. But yeah, if you, I don't know, I mean, the thing is that every degree helps to save, but it's really, there's not a right answer to a single degree, basically. So I would recommend look at ASHRAE, for example, look at their best practices, because those are the organizations, those are the experts, basically. So I would refer to those best practices.
I listen to your podcast, I'm a big fan. I find personally that my biggest inspiration is my daughter who comes home from school and tells me what I should and shouldn't be doing. My question is, do you know what the UK government is doing at schools level to improve our knowledge of that?
Yeah, don't ask me about the new government. But certainly, I mean, there's a lot of controversy because I think the young generation now get a whole kind of plethora of environmental information that we never had. And I basically had nothing when I was in school. But, I'm old, so that's probably explained by that. But I think that there has been some worrying stuff about, the politicisation of the agenda. And I think you see this in the media where it becomes like a culture war. And you can already hear people rumbling about, can we afford net zero? As well, we really can't afford not to go down the net zero route. So I think there is more and more wanting to be taught to kids, and also not to take away a sense of hope. I think the optimism is quite dark. I describe myself as a dark optimist, you've probably heard of the podcast. I think we'll get through it. I think it's going to get messy. But I also think it's not fair to dismiss a sense of hope for those young people. And that's what you get from the sort of Greta Thunbergs of the world as well. It's like, to be a climate realist is not to be a defeatist or a fatalist. That's actually really important. We have to look this squarely in the eye and confront what is coming down the track towards it. But that's not to say that that's without hope. I think I do get a bit more suspicious of the sort of techno-utopian optimism that, hey, we're going to fix all this, it's going to be smooth, it's not going to cost us anything, and it won't be any bumps along the way. It's like, I don't think that's true either. So we've got to sort of brace ourselves for some of that, and also give our kids, that fundamental education around creativity, compassion, and critical thinking, which I think are going to be the three components of the education of the future. It's not just reading art, it's reading, writing, and literature. It's creativity, compassion, and critical thinking.
Just a very quick addition to your question. So I just clarified we submitted documents also, which will be shared with you as well. There's a white paper in there talking about what can be done from a data center perspective and what other companies do as well. So I would refer to this document. And if you have any questions, reach out to me, please.
Brilliant. Thank you both Ed and Christian for your time this morning. Amazing and really things to take away and think about there. We've got a quick 20-minute break now, which will be back downstairs. So fill yourselves up on coffees, pastries, and whatever else they brought out. We'll be back up here for 10 past, about 10 past, with George, Uva, and Ideal. Thank you.
This is an amazing venue, isn't it? This is absolutely, I've just travelled down from Leeds this morning. You know what, London's quite nice, but it doesn't quite beat Leeds. Right, so I've got a question for you all to start with, okay? I want to show of hands. Who here cares about the planet? Come on, put your hands up. No one's going to keep your hand down, though, are you? Let's be honest. You know, I was talking to a guy the other day called Nathaniel Comer, and he works for a charity that's called Sunscreen IT, and he said everybody talks about saving the planet, but the reality is the planet really doesn't care what we do. Whatever happens to humanity, the planet will still be here in 200 years, 300 years. Whenever we're talking about saving the planet, what we're actually talking about is saving ourselves. This is about self-preservation. Okay, so everyone I talk to at the moment are massively prioritizing sustainability. Okay? So, what I did is I did some research to find out who does actually care about sustainability. Does anyone here use TikTok? Hands up again. Okay, so generally, the younger population, I'll be very careful about this. Generally, younger people in the room use TikTok. You look young from here, maybe I'm quite far, I don't know. So, back in May, I checked the sustainability hashtag on TikTok, and it had had 1.7 billion views. Okay, that's a lot of views on TikTok for sustainability. I thought it was just people dancing. It was not. I checked again last week, and it was 2.7 billion views. Who cares about the planet? Who cares about sustainability? Young people, for a start. So Twitter is more my speed. So I also checked the sustainability hashtag on Twitter. 692,000 views per hour. That's a lot of views. I wish I could get that many views. I've 10 years on Twitter. No, 692,000 views per hour on the sustainability hashtag. Google, over the past 5 years, 1,650% growth in people looking at sustainability. One of the things that I want to get across today, and it's a little bit controversial, okay? One of the things I want to get across today is what we've been doing in IT over 30 years, what we've been focusing on when it comes to being sustainable, to a certain extent, is a distraction from the real problem. Okay, so some of this is going to make you feel really down, okay, some of the stuff we go through. But hopefully the solution that we show you will cheer you up. Okay, so I want to see some smiles, please, at some point during this presentation. The reason this stuff is so important and the reason that so many people are talking about it is because, to a certain extent, we see lots of news articles about what we're doing to the planet. Okay? And all these news articles I've got on here are just from the past 12 months. Since COP26 in Glasgow. So the moving trajectory, climate change could cause earthquakes. We knew that. 50-degree heat, food shortages and wars, we want from that. And this is probably the most recent one. 1/3 of Pakistan underwater. Now, the 50-degree heat one, the only time I ever experienced anything over 40-degree heat was on my honeymoon in the desert outside of Abu Dhabi, when we went off-roading. Didn't ever think we'd get anything like that in the UK, and it happened. What's happening is climate change. The sustainability conversation is being made personal. And to be completely honest with you, 12 months ago, not many people were talking to me about sustainability. 6 months ago, this really started resonating. I was at CIO Visions, I was telling a couple of you earlier, I was at CIO Visions Monday and Tuesday this week, talking to 20 CIOs. Every single one of them said they are now KPI'd on sustainability. Their CEOs are KPI'd on sustainability. This is now more important and is resonating more than it ever has in the past. When I'm talking to all sorts of different verticals, when I'm talking to healthcare or local government, when I'm talking to finance, it surprised me how important this has become. There's another reason why it's become important, though, and that's the regulatory environment in the UK. I'm assuming some of you here are familiar with some of these regulations we put on the screen. So the UK, has actually done pretty well in this stuff. We're actually ahead of the pack when it comes to the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. We were the first country in the world to mandate that as of April this year, which means that companies over 500 million turnover now need to report on any investments which could potentially have a climate risk. We're seeing this everywhere, okay? Not just the UK, this is spreading around the world. The tightening of the regulatory environment, the news articles that we're seeing, this is becoming more important than ever. But then you know that because you're here at a Bytes Go Green event. Yeah? You understand this stuff. You've probably seen stats like this before, okay? I'm not going to dwell on this massively. End user computing is responsible directly and indirectly for 2.5% of global emissions. You've seen stuff like this before, and after a certain amount of time, it's sort of, we get desensitized to it. There's a really, really important stat that I want to try and get across. But it really sort of ties into end user computing, okay? So I'm going to talk about 3 different phases. There's a really important stat in this. So first of all, we're going to talk about devices. We're going to talk about consumption. We're going to talk about e-waste. I'm assuming you've all heard about the e-waste problems over the past few years. If not, then there's a really, really good documentary on Netflix called E-Life. I encourage you all to watch it. It's scary what we're doing with e-waste, but we'll go through that. So let's start with devices, and this is the key stat. If you only take one thing away from this presentation, I'll be disappointed, but if it's this key stat, it sounds like clickbait, doesn't it? If it's this key stat, then it'll be fine. And this is it. Up to, sometimes more, 83% of a device's total carbon footprint is generated during manufacturing. When that shiny new laptop arrives on your desk or on one of your users' desks, before you've put an image on it or put applications on it, from a sustainability perspective, that ship has sailed. This takes a lot of people by surprise. And this isn't just laptops, this is PCs, this is thin clients. For a long, long time in IT, we have been focusing on power consumption as being the best way to be sustainable. The sad fact is, actually, by far the biggest component of emissions, of CO2 emissions, of climate impact, when it comes to end-use devices, is the manufacturing process in the first place. And I bet no hardware vendor has ever told you that. We've been distracted. Remember Energy Star? Yesterday was Global Energy Star Day. You saw this little sort of orange logo appear at the top of the screen, and it sort of made you feel warm and fuzzy because you're doing something good because you were reducing your power consumption. It was distracting you from the real problem. So why do you think that manufacturing is so intensive? Well, I'm going to tell you. So I did more research, and you know what? A lot of our research is backed up by a third-party research organization called PX3. Okay, so if you want to see any of these stats, we can share reports with you, that's not a problem. So I looked into all the raw materials that you get in a laptop. I'm going to pick on laptops a lot today, by the way. Some of these I've never heard of before. Anyone come across ruthenium before? Okay, good. I was doing the same presentation a couple of weeks ago and someone put a hand up. I don't know what ruthenium is, okay? These are the raw components that go into a laptop. But the thing is, you can't just open a mine and get all of these different raw materials out of one mine. You've got to have multiple different mines. So what I did was I decided to plot all these different raw materials onto a map. Are you all familiar with Apple's tagline, designed in California, assembled in China? They miss out so many different steps in that tagline. So, first of all, assembled in China, usually it's on the East Coast, okay? But actually, it's mined globally. Okay, a lot of those raw components in the devices that you're using, that mobile phone you're tapping on right now, I'm not, just made you feel guilty now, you don't care. That mobile phone you're tapping on right now, a lot of the raw materials that come from across the world, and we talked about conflict energy earlier. Same thing applies to conflict materials, conflict minerals. I mean, you can probably pick out a few different areas on here where there's conflicts. So these materials are mined globally, but then they've got to be shipped across the East Coast of China to be assembled. And most of those components aren't actually manufactured in China. They're assembled, but some of them could be manufactured in Taiwan. A lot of politics there, we're going to go into it. And potentially shipped from Taiwan to the East Coast of China. That's not the end of the process, because once these devices have been created, they've then got to be shipped across for distribution. Okay? Most of the world's laptops are manufactured on the East Coast of China. If they're Dell, if they're anything else, they're manufactured on the East Coast of China. PCs from Dell are manufactured in Tilburg. Okay? But generally, when we're talking about laptops, that's where they come from. So it'd be great if Apple could sort of call out designed in California, mined globally, then all that stuff is shipped to China, then it's put together in China. It just does, it's not a good tagline, is it? But this is what we're not told about. We're familiar with the financial impact of devices, but not the climate impact. We don't see this stuff. By the way, I think we should be very proud of what we've done here. Laptops, mobile phones, PCs are incredible. This global supply chain is absolutely amazing. It's a good example of what humanity as a species can do when we work together. But we need to understand there's a climate impact to this. Just to bring you down a little bit more, we're think about mining, when we think about CO2, sometimes we miss out the human impact. Okay, I'm not going to read that for you because, yes, but you can imagine how stressful mining can be for individual communities, for individual miners. How many, just the local community, what those raw materials and those chemicals leaching into the ground can do. There's plenty of information out there about mining and devastating impacts. Did you know that you can go onto most manufacturers' websites and pull down their product carbon footprint? We can. It's all publicly available, so it's called PCFs. So I chose a random laptop. I went onto Dell's PCF website, chose a random Dell Latitude 5521, and then pulled all the stats down for that. It's available for anyone to have a look at. So Latitude 5521 was responsible for roughly 379 kilos of CO2, one device, okay, over a 4-year life cycle, which is equivalent to 4 mature trees. A mature tree is about 100 years old. To offset that laptop, you need to have 4 trees growing for 100 years. Okay? Now, interestingly, or not, you tell me, interestingly, the manufacturing CO2 was 314 kilos, or roughly 82.8%. So my stat is roughly right. For a lot of devices, you'll see this higher or lower. Now, one of the questions we tend to get from people is, okay, laptop. Problem with the laptop is the battery is going to decay and not be very useful. That's not very sustainable, is it? So, when you look at a device like a laptop, actually the battery is the least polluting and the least responsible for CO2 emissions out of the entire device. By far, the most CO2-intensive components of the chassis of the computer. Can't change that stuff. Okay? Again, this takes a lot of people by surprise. We've been told it's all about power consumption. Interesting stat time. So EUC consumes 3% of global power generation. I did the numbers, that could be wrong. That's roughly 900 power stations running 24/7 to power all of our end user devices globally. That's a lot of power stations. Okay? Now, we do have some good news when it comes to consumption. Okay, and we'll get to that shortly. Who has worked in IT for 20 years or so? Who's been a sysadmin or a server administrator or been in charge of policies? You there. That sounded really weird. This gentleman here. Did you ever do anything like this to save power, to be more sustainable? So, group policy, potentially, turn down screen brightness, or put on a little screensaver that blanks the screen. I've done that as well, because we've been told that's the best way to be sustainable. Okay, and this is where the focus has been for 30-odd years. I've seen huge banks do this. I've seen small organizations do this, and it makes us feel good. Wait for it. So if we're going to put a pie chart on the screen and have a look at sustainability and CO2 emissions, what we've been focusing on for the past 30 years is this little dark-coloured piece of the pie. And we've been forgetting about we haven't been told about the manufacturing emissions. Okay? For 30 or 40 years, we've been, and the same goes for Energy Star. It's all about this little piece here. Interestingly, hopefully, again, is this little piece here is going to get even less important when it comes to sustainability. And this is, again, where the UK leads, but the rest of the world is following. Are you familiar with carbon intensity? We've done a great job in the UK of decarbonising our power supply. I know we hear horror stories, but actually, we've done a great job. So 1 kilowatt hour of power consumed in 2009, January 2009, was responsible for 607 grams of CO2 equivalent. Fast forward to 2022, the same week, 148 grams of CO2. Over that period, we reduced the carbon in our power supply by over 75%. So if we go back to this slide, then actually, and the government has mandated by 2035, our entire grid needs to be carbon neutral. 2035, and that will all be manufactured. It's getting more important, not less important. Has this taken you by surprise a little bit? Is this different to the message that you've heard before? Good man. Excellent. So I would love to tell you that there's some positive news, but now we're going to have a look at e-waste. So you're all familiar with e-waste, I'm assuming. So last year, the world threw away 57 million tons of e-waste. Now, I know that's quite difficult to work out, what's 57 million tons, but don't worry. I've put it in a slide for you. It's equivalent to 350 cruise ships worth of stuff that we threw. There were 350 cruise ships on there. It took me ages, and then I sort of thought, hey, I could have just done copy-paste. But never mind, there's 350 cruise ships on there, 77 miles worth of cruise ships. And that's from the World Health Organization. And they say this is because of rapid obsolescence of mobile phones and laptops and PCs and tablets and think clients and all this stuff. That's a huge amount. And I worked out it would take me 27 hours to walk 77 miles. I'm quite slow. This is what we're throwing away every year, okay? And this is the really, really emotional side that goes along with this. And if you get a chance to watch eLife, only 17% of that e-waste is recycled. Only 17%. There's that 83% stat again. 83% is not recycled, or not properly recycled. A lot of it ends up in places like China, like Ghana, like Indonesia, where it's not properly disposed of. This is where you have women and children go to these tips and burn components to get the raw materials out. You can imagine how dangerous that is, okay? There's so much information out there about e-waste and the dangers of e-waste. If you have a chance to look at it, please watch the documentary. It's only 52 minutes. It's worth it. There is a solution, okay? This is where you can start to feel a little bit happier. There is a solution. And of course, there's an iGel angle to this, as you're probably waiting for. Extend the 4-year refresh cycle. It's very, very simple. So my research suggested that the average refresh cycle is 3.8 years. Okay? 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Average is 3.8 years. All we've got to do is extend the 4-year refresh cycle. How do we do that? Take with us the endpoint. If you think about why we buy brand new devices so often, why we buy more powerful processors, and more RAM and more hard drive space, it's not all about Teams. It's Windows. Okay? Windows 11 was awful for the environment. Great operating system, by the way. I love Windows. But from a climate perspective, Windows 11 invalidated and made obsolete so much kit. It's only a few years old. That's not a good way of running the planet. It's not a good way of running tech. Take Windows off the endpoint and use your devices for longer with iGel. When we say take Windows off the endpoint, what we mean is deliver it using VMware or Citrix or Microsoft AVD or Windows 365, run it somewhere else. Even Microsoft says they prefer if you run Windows 11 from the cloud, from Azure. Okay? You can still give people an amazing Windows 11 experience. What we're saying is, run our operating system. Start here. Run our operating system on those endpoints. And our OS has been designed and built to be incredibly thin, to work on older devices. We have customers with 12-year-old devices running iGel OS but consuming Windows 11 that sits in the cloud. When you think about modern workspaces, they look a bit like their SaaS applications and Windows applications delivered from the cloud or from the data center. What we do is put our operating system on any of those endpoints that you're already running, as long as they're x86 based. And then we have the ability to manage over the air all of those devices and bring them together. We have over 9,000 different configurations. That sounds scary. 9,000 different configuration parameters you can push down to these devices to make sure they're secure. It's a read-only operating system, which means it's secure. Okay, there's so many different parts to this. I'm just going to focus on the sustainability piece. One of the key things when it comes to sustainability is the fact that we tend to assume there's a green tax. We tend to think there's a cost premium that goes with being green. But if you imagine taking a 4-year-old laptop and using it for another 4 years, actually a lot of that cost has gone away. Actually, you're saving because you're not buying those new devices. Actually, what you're doing, if you do decide to go for AVD or Windows 365 or VMware Horizon or Citrix, you can potentially make the entire project cost neutral, even cost negative, simply by reusing those devices for an extra 4 years or an extra 8 years potentially. That's a different conversation, okay? I'm going to focus on the sustainability piece. You can find it afterwards. Consumption. This isn't as important. Running iGel OS can cut your consumption by 22% on its endpoint devices because it's a thin operating system. This is a key piece and pretty much the last piece that I wanted to get to. So if you were going to, as an example, okay, if you have an 8-year period and a traditional 4-year refresh cycle, you would be running 2 laptops over those 8 years. And at the end of that period, you'd be responsible for 758 kilos of CO2 equivalent. Now, if you used 1 laptop over that 8-year period, you'd actually be saving 353 kilos of CO2 per device. You scale that up, that's huge. One last example here, okay? We actually worked with, Standard Life. You're familiar with Standard Life, so we worked with Standard Life. And what they did is they repurposed over 3,000 of their devices. In fact, it's now over 5,000. And by repurposing those devices with iGel, and they had Citrix in the back end, they managed to save 400 or avoid the emission of 425,000 kilos of CO2 equivalent. Okay, and that's not even rolling in the cost saving. 500 acres of mature forest, or, as we do in the UK, 250 football pitches worth of trees. Okay? Brilliant. So I think I'm out of time. Any questions? Oh, go on, Pete.
So, I had a conversation with break, and it's all very nice saying run Windows out some applications that are not fit for running Windows now, Teams being one of them, what's agile.
Oh, I disagree with that. No. You can run Teams through a virtual desktop quite easily. So Teams optimization has been around for a long, long time. We completely support Teams optimization from AVD, from Citrix, from VMware. Teams really isn't a problem. You can run that in the cloud, and you can offload it to the endpoint. That used to be a problem probably 2 or 3 years ago, not anymore. In fact, I would argue better than I would. That's a good question, then. Any other questions? Has this taken you by surprise? Have you been...
If change isn't what it is.
What is a problem? So I had a conversation on Monday with a gentleman who works for a manufacturing organisation, and they have some old Windows devices that are right next to their machines. Okay, now potentially, because the latency between those devices running it in a virtual environment could be a problem. And those Windows, those native Windows applications need to run on those very specialist machines right next to manufacturing equipment. That's the only time I've seen it be a problem. It's a very niche use case in my experience. Good question, though. Has it taken you by surprise? Is it a different angle to look at? The people I've been speaking to love this because it's tangible. Because it's something you can touch and feel. And we talk a lot to higher education. How much time do I have? Loads. We talk a lot to higher education, okay? And the general complaint we tend to get, all the observation is, people want new shiny devices. People want to have this shiny new device. What we found with higher education is you can just give the students a little piece of paper, cycled, obviously, with a little leaf on it that just says, look, if you can use this device, if you can love this device for an extra 3 years, you're saving 350 kilos of CO2. It's almost becoming socially acceptable right now. We're on the cusp of people getting new phones every year. If you see someone with a brand new iPhone and they've only just replaced another one, you look at them and go, did you need that? Are you just showing off? We're getting that with laptops. Okay? Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time. Hopefully that was interesting.
Am I live? Yeah, I'm live. I think I'm the last session before lunch. Is that right, Cassie? Oh, okay. I haven't got a break. Let's see. So my name's Mike Rowe, and I work for Pure Storage. Very proud to be a Puritan for the last 9.5 years. Officially, I'm Senior Director of Systems Engineering. I'm essentially a techie at heart, like Christian mentioned this morning. But I've really been growing fond of this subject. So I'll be talking about ESG, mainly the E of ESG. I would kind of class myself, I think, as a typical human. I'm kind of like looking at an electric car, I recycle, I'm trying to do a lot of the things that we're all trying to do in the room. But about 18 months ago, I finished my MBA at Warwick University, and across almost every single module, there was a dusting of the E, the S, and or the G. And it's just something I've sort of found myself talking about and really enjoyed learning about. So hopefully we spend the next 10 or 15 minutes on this. Some of the themes will be very similar to what you've heard. It won't be a product picked at all on Pure, but I might refer to Pure in some instances to emphasise upon. So let's get started. So ESG stands for environmental, social and governance, all very, very important pillars in their own right, of course. But we will be concentrating on the E, environmental. But across all three of these pillars, it's very interesting to see some of the stakeholders now. I think the general theme in the room here today is looking at the personas on a spreadsheet before I turn up today. It really has become very important for almost every different role within an organisation. It's not just something that the C-suite are talking about anymore. In terms of customers, something that's really struck me, and the chap that just presented there talked about this kind of theme of sustainability and how it's changed from 6 months and currently, and I totally agree. We're looking at things like RFPs from customers now. Instead of just asking the old questions of, say, what is the rack space, power and cooling, we're getting asked more very specific questions around our sustainability and what we do as an organisation. And as a public company, analysts and investors are looking at us now to see what is going to be our performance based on a lot of things, including our ESG credentials. So it makes good business, so it's something I'm very proud to talk about and something that Pure's taken really, really seriously. And then, of course, it's in the media everywhere now. We see it every single day, which for me is brilliant. It's just bringing this into focus for more and more people. Just an interesting one from my side of things. I've probably interviewed 200 people at Pure, probably in my 9.5 years across different roles. Recently started to build out a junior SE team across Europe and interviewed probably 60 people across 5 roles. I would say 75% of those people asked me about the ESG credentials of the business. So it's absolutely changed. So just from a business point of view, if we want to attract top talent into our organisations, we have to have a really, really good story on this as well. So it's a bit of a grim picture. There's obviously a terrible climate urgency. We're all aware of that. It's been a strange one for me. It feels like in some respects it's been the best summer I can remember for a long time. You know, long days, wasn't particularly muggy, but we know in the background there we've had record-breaking temperatures, and we know some of the reasons why. This was mentioned briefly earlier on. Iron ore mining has a major, major impact on our environment. So we need to pull a lot of stuff out of the ground. To give you an example, a mobile phone has 60 different metals in it. It take about 200 grams of raw material out of the ground for one phone. For a laptop, it's about 700 kilograms. You can kind of start to build that out and see just how much we have to, get out of the ground in the first place. 2/3 of the world are in water stress conditions. So the world is heating up, water is decreasing, and there's some parts of the world now that are really, really suffering. So we've got to be very intelligent in our data centres now to kind of reduce what we use in terms of power and the water associated with that. Just a fact I read recently, data centre operators at the moment average about 1.8 litres of water per kilowatt hour. Most of them now are trying to get down to 0.4 litres per kilowatt hour. So I would say for those in the room, when you look at your data centres, I know a lot of organisations now are switching data centres. It's a good start to see what they're going to be offering for you as customers. And the digital sector, of course, is a blessing and a curse. I'm a type 1 diabetic, shout out to everybody else who is in the room. So I've got a little sensor in my back, and it sends real-time information to my phone, which could go off at any time, by the way. And so for me, it's a lifesaver, literally a lifesaver on multiple occasions. On the same token, though, it's been stored on my phone, and it's been sent up to the cloud. So we know that we are both a blessing and a curse. So from a Pure point of view, then, Pure believes that building sustainable technology infrastructure is necessary in helping to mitigate climate change. We do this by creating products that allow our customers to save energy in their IT environment. We'll talk about that in more detail as we go through. Seems like a small number. So data centers are responsible for 1% of energy usage worldwide. 1's not a big number. 1% of a lot is still a lot. As mentioned earlier, though, there's a massive impact before it even gets to the data center. And so 1% is big enough. That could be as high as 14% by 2040, worst case estimates. I suggest it probably won't get that bad, but it's certainly a number we need to really keep our eye on. So a 50,000-foot view then, so we dig all this stuff out of the ground, has a massive impact on the environment. We put it together in some sort of IT components that we all know and love and put it into our data centers. We then go ahead and start to use this kit. Storage generally 3 to 5 years, sometimes a little bit longer. It depends, in my experience. But we use it, and of course, at each of these stages, we are impacting the environment in some way. As the gentleman mentioned earlier on as well, e-waste is over 50 million tonnes per year. So on the one hand, we're putting loads of iron ore out of the ground. That in itself is running out, by the way. Best case estimates, we've got 30 years left of iron ore. Some say 2 years. Again, probably something in the middle. So we're running out, but we're still taking it out of the ground, and when we finish using it, we just chuck it back to the ground and don't use it, or very little of it. To compound the problem, data, of course, is growing. We're all using more and more data. More and more data is being used by more and more people across the world, as we've already seen today. And technology in general is just taken off. We talked about TikTok earlier. I don't use TikTok. Used to, got a bit addicted to it, so come up with that one. But we are all using a lot more of it. The inefficient data center one here is quite key. So one of the gentlemen mentioned earlier on a PUE rating, or the power rating of the data center. Pure customer recently just moved their data center. They've got a PUE 1.2, which is the best I've heard. So just data centers alone, forget what you put inside of them, are getting much more efficient now, but there's still a lot of old Asian data centers out there. This is just one chart. It doesn't paint a pretty picture. This is carbon dioxide when burning the fossil fuels. You can see the lines going in completely the wrong direction. Just to kind of emphasise, this could be one of the many charts we put up here. Most of them look, I think all of us in the room are fairly aware of that. And we definitely all know about this one, electricity costs. So from October 1st, electricity went up to 52 pence per kilowatt hour for us at home. That's capped, I think, for the time being there. Speaking to a few customers recently, and I was trying to figure out how much do they pay in their data centres. In 2020, the average for electricity in your data centre was 14 pence per kilowatt hour. The average, based on the customer I spoke to, small subset, 9 or 10 customers, is 38 pence an hour. Some have already started paying 52 pence an hour. So we're definitely trying to do better things to protect the environment, but it's also some great gains here in terms of reducing the power you need and therefore reducing the cost of all that. So you'll see there's a lot going forward. There's this concept of Scope 1 direct and Scope 2 and 3 indirect emissions. So for all those in the room, if your organisation has gone through something similar to Pure recently when we issued our first ESG report, these are all over the reports, and we have to have what we're trying to do to reduce and get better at all of these things. In brief, Scope 1 essentially is the facilities, so Pure Office, for example. Scope 2 is the utilities used by those. And Scope 3, one example of Scope 3 is the products that we sell, storage devices that we sell. And so we've recently issued our ESG report, and I'll talk to you in a moment about how we improve across all three of those. But before I do that, there's something worth mentioning, and I think Ed mentioned it earlier on. A lot of people seem to be talking about ESG, not doing a lot about ESG. That is most certainly changing. It's something that Pure takes really, really seriously. We'll talk about evergreen shortly and how we've always tried to crunch down the amount of kit you need, but it's one of 5 strategic pillars for Pure. We've always had a heritage. For those that have, certainly the partners in the room that have resold Pure for a long time, we used to have this great story when we came to market. So when I started Pure as an SE 9.5 years ago, and I'd go out and say, oh, look at the shiny SSD array, brilliant. And it's a 10x saving on your disk arrays, which used to always pan out at 10x. So it's a lot smaller and a lot less power. What we started to do more recently, though, is try to start to offset some of the stuff we do, because we know technology has a massive impact, and we've got a long way to go. A couple of examples of that are we donated $750,000 recently to some sustainability initiatives. Like events like this, we generally put trees in the ground and things like that to try and offset some of the things we're doing. We've got a long way to go, but we're on the right track. And as mentioned, about 9 months ago, I think now, we had our first ESG report. So this is for our organisation internally to baseline how good or bad we are. There are these things called sustainability data aggregators out there now. SBTI was mentioned earlier on. We can go then and look at organisations to see how good or bad they are. So we've got a pretty good rating. I'm going to look to improve it every year. Here's the Scope 1, 2 and 3 again. So Scope 1 and 2, 50% reduction by FY30 and neutral by FY40 is our goal, and a reduction of power by 66% per petabyte shipped. So again, we're always trying to crunch down and make the most of the physical kit we've got. I'll talk to that somewhat shortly. Some of you in the room that have known Pure for a while will definitely have seen this forklift before. So one of the things that Pure did when they came to market was we had this concept of not having to refresh your storage every 3 to 5 years. So how it used to go, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar in the room with this, you might buy some storage for 3 years, you might then extend the support for 2 years, then the support generally gets a bit too expensive from the vendors in the market, so you end up ripping it and replacing it. Very, very typical of what we've seen. And then, of course, during that time, you won't have to migrate. You've got twice the kit that's being powered on. Worst case scenario for some banks, that's about an 18-month migration. Usually, a fair bit less, but there is certainly a time when both of those things are powered on. And then, of course, after that 3 or 5 years, we're going to get that and add it into the 50 million tonnes that we've dumped into the landfill. Pure's always done this a little bit differently. Got a slide after this one that talks about this evergreen model. The idea is we never really chuck anything away and start again. We might change components over time. We might change loads of small drives to less big drives and things like that, but we're always trying to stay with the relevant form factor, which we'll explain shortly. And then relatively recently, a couple of years ago, we started to look at how customers like to consume now, especially when you look at public clouds or subscription-based services. So you can consume Pure on a subscription basis and simply buy what you need today and expand it out from there. So it's very different from that old technology where you would have to maybe buy a load of storage, probably buy a little bit extra just in case, power it all on for a period of 5 years. You might only use 40% of that, 50% of it. You have to power it on and cool it over that period of time. Just a little fact as well, some of the components that come out of Pure storage arrays for upgraded components, we often reuse ourselves internally, so in our labs and things like that, some of our inventory. So again, we're trying to drive down the waste. There's always going to be waste. We're going to try and drive it down more and more. So one such example, I remember the FA320s when I started at Pure. I don't know how this has happened 9.5 years later. It was commodity hardware at the time. It was commodity SSDs. We did very well with it. But if I draw your attention to 2015 there, you notice we went from 2 controllers with a cool little orange logos on the front to more of a chassis, which is our own hardware. Now, why am I telling you that? If you look at storage though, storage just moves between controllers. We didn't get rid of the storage at that point, we just continued, again, chucking less of it into landfill. And then of course we get to the point where the size of the drives was so small when I started putting this stuff. It was, the biggest array we sold was 2.75 terabytes. That's only 9.5 years ago. But you get to the point here where it makes much more sense to consolidate a load of small drives into a smaller physical footprint. So again, we're just trying to drive down the amount of power it needs. So a couple of bullet points on this. Before I carry on, one fact I forgot to mention. The medium-sized data center uses 130 million gallons of water a year. Now that is based on the water needed to create the power in the first place, and of course to cool it. So whilst we're kind of talking about sustainability, we often talk about power. The water element is really, really important. What we still see in a lot of data centers is spinning disk arrays. We still see hybrid arrays. They're often over-provisioned just so that you can use them at peak times. With an all-flash array, of course, you don't need to worry about that. And at Pure, we've constantly tried to start using new versions of flash. So our drives now, our own drives, are not off-the-shelf SSDs anymore. We started with a single-level cell flash, multi-level cell, quad-level cell now. They look exactly the same. The way you place the charge in the flash means you can store 4 times the data. So again, we're just trying to make things smaller and smaller, and they don't draw any more power than the same physical footprint of flash. With Evergreen, as mentioned, there's a lot less waste. And storage optimization is a real key one for us. When I started, selling this stuff way back when, data reduction was a massive differentiator for Pure. So essentially what we're doing is we're getting blocks of data. When they're the same, we're simply just storing one of those. And that could be anywhere from 3 times to 10 times the efficiency. So again, 3 times to 10 times less data storage that you need. What's really important though now is typically that is twice as good as the other vendors in the market. So if you just take that as a sort of just one single fact, you're going to need half the kit. There's other cool stuff we do, but storage optimization is really, really key. And then just for the room, really, a couple of things I'm coming across recently in RFPs is we've been asked what our capacity for what and performance for what is, and it's pretty good. Bit of statement, 85% I think 85% the energy of less energy than the alternatives in the market. Now, this depends on the product, this depends on the data reduction, depends on all sorts of stuff, but it's pretty good at what it does. I'll give you 3 very quick examples. There's one of our products, this is made about 4 times more effective using power than competing hybrid array. And when you look at this from a monetary standpoint, at the worst case prices that we're looking at the moment for electricity, this is about £58,000 a year difference just to power this thing on. So it's much better for the environment and it saves a lot of money too. The second example, a different product this time versus a competing all-flash array, 6.5 times better. And then finally, another product for us, this one's about 3 times better, based on some of the cool stuff on the left-hand side there. So what does that mean kind of, to us as citizens then? So that 85% difference means just under 133,000 miles driven in a car, nearly 6,000 gallons of fuel. And to offset that, we need to plant 873 trees and have them growing for at least 10 years. So that alone is making a significant difference, but we still know we've got a long way to go. So just to wrap up then very quickly, I think Pure's always had the heritage of trying to reduce the amount of physical kit we need and therefore the power associated with that. Having our own drives, they last a lot longer, there's less e-waste. Having the data reduction, again, can drive down the usage of the physical kit you need. And now with the consumption model, you've been able to buy just what you need when you want to use it. It means that you don't have to buy something up front and power and cool that for a period of years, and perhaps only get to use part of that storage. That's the presentation. If you've got any questions, I'll take them. I'm also around for a few hours if you're from the shy members of the audience. Okay. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, can you hear me at the back? Yeah, that's great. So my name's Greenest. I am the EMEA Arresting Director for Druva, and I'm married. I've got a couple of kids. Anyone's got any teenagers there in the audience? I've got a 12-year-old. There's one over there. She is going to work for Disney when she grows up, and she wants to work on Frozen 4, not 3, 4, obviously going forward. My son, he's just started college, and actually it was the first time I've got on a train with him this morning. Two of us came up together. He said, "Dad, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm here to present with our partner Bytes, so thank you for inviting us this on sustainability, on looking at carbon emissions, the carbon footprint, going green, which is why we're here today." Okay? He said, "What's all that about?" So this was a really good discussion. So as I'm talking to you, hopefully this is the discussion we had on the train as well. So the first thing he wanted to know is what am I working at Druva going to do about helping going green? And that's the big discussion for today. So I did a lot of work, just like Mike and just like Ben has done, looking at what legislation, what the world is doing about sustainability, because we all know it's on the desks of most CXOs today. The Paris Agreement, I don't know if you guys have actually looked at that. It's really, really important sort of like gathering to look at where we are with sustainability. You can read a lot about this, it's about carbon footprint, etc. But I think the key thing is, I really took home, is I work for a vendor that is responsible to make some of this happen. And it's the very last line that's most important. We are a 100% SaaS-based company. We live inside the cloud. And it's our job when we're designing our solutions to make sure we use those devices in the cloud in the most efficient way. So the big thing for me, and we've heard it from Mike, etc., and Ben, is reduce your waste. So that's the kind of thing that I am responsible with, and making sure that my kids, when they grow up, have a world where they can work on Frozen 4, or where they can be, like for example, my son wants to travel the world, for example. So for anyone with kids in the room, it's kind of, this is why this is important to me, okay? So when I did the research and started to work on that, I'm actually a member, by the way, of the Institute of Electrical and Technology, and I actually do a lot of work, pass that back, and they give me some information which was really good. Now we partner with AWS, that's our cloud vendor of choice, and they did a report which we call the 451 research report, looking into their particular sustainability, look at their carbon footprint, etc. And what was really interesting, I think they told the truth. I think they actually put their hands up and said, today we're only 80%. But when we get to our view, our goals by 2025, we want to be 96% sustainable. In other words, our carbon emissions are reduced. Now, this is obviously in comparison to a normal data center on premise. It's a good report. Anyone, you can just type in 451 and you'll see the report. In fact, I was working with one of my German customers yesterday who actually wanted me to talk about writing data to the appropriate region in Europe. So if they were in Frankfurt, he wanted to write data to Frankfurt. If he was in London, he wanted to write data to London. Okay? Now you're starting to think, well, how can Druva, or a cloud-based technology solution, how can they help our customers? So we're at the last line of defense. Guys, we are basically a data protection company. And that last line of defense, we're responsible for a few things. So Mr. Gillespie earlier talked about a couple of things. One of the things that he talked about is that 90% of the data, I think he said, is not been touched. It doesn't get touched, it gets saved and stored. And I think one of the great things that I'm proud of my company is when we look at data movement, moving your data, whether it be from a cloud environment or whether it be on-premise, our job is to move the most minimum amount of data possible in order for you to feel good, in other words, that you are doing a bit for the community and the earth as well. So I'm really quite pleased that we've patented these algorithms, as I said, to move this very, very small amount of data when we're doing data protection. So who are Druva? Now, the way that I'm going to talk about these next few slides might come over as a bit of a product pitch, but it's not, because I've been looking at these statistics and thinking, how is that really helping the community, and literally looking at sustainability. Now, we're doing 2.5 billion backups a year in the cloud, right? We're not doing them on premise. We're not consuming any sort of like power, cooling, whatever in people's data centers. We're doing inside AWS, and AWS obviously driving towards their own sustainability. We're growing at a phenomenal rate at the moment, because we are getting so many customers wanting to move off premise, wanting to back up their cloud operations, and reading the fine print, guys, reading the fine print. So, for example, Microsoft 365, the fine print there says you are in something called a shared responsibility model. So we at Microsoft are responsible for running the service. You are responsible for the data protection of your data, okay? Just read those type of things. So it becomes owner for our customers to make sure that works. So we grow, and then we have to make sure that the people you talk to on the phone also are in locations where we are controlling that sustainability as well. Literally, our offices, we've actually gone mega green on where the offices are located. We try and have not too many offices, we bring them together. And hence, our customers have already given us very high, what we call net promoter score of 89. So this is us. We're this 100% cloud-based solution, and there's some really certain advantages that we can obviously help you guys to deliver your sustainability as well. This cloud idea, okay, you think, well, what is the cloud and how is this going to deliver for me? And I think one of the things that we all will get worried about is security. In other words, if I'm going to put my data into the cloud, how secure is that data? Can I be hacked by things like ransomware, etc.? And what we're finding as well, and here's the connection back to carbon emissions and sustainability, is these people running what we call command and control servers, which are using various systems around the globe, they are churning up an awful lot of activity. Guys, has anyone left their laptops on overnight charging in the morning, found it really warm? Unfortunately, you may be hacked at that point, or they may be using a command and control to spin out a few jobs onto your laptop to run it. It's the same with mobile phones. So this is a way that our responsibility, second, is to try and eradicate that effectiveness of that ransomware solution. So this is another way in which we're looking at reducing emissions from that perspective. So our responsibility is looking at your cloud applications like Microsoft, Google, Salesforce. It's on-premise workloads, and also it's to do with any of your endpoints. It could be so Android phone, it could be an iOS phone, it could be a laptop, it could be an edge device, right? Again, our responsibility is trying to make sure we move as little amount of data as possible, using the least amount of CPU processing power. So obviously then reflective of this drive that we're trying to do with reduction of emissions. Now, one of the things that I was trying to do as well, I had a chat with one of my customers the other week to find out, why did you pick Druva as a solution for data protection in your environment? And they told me a bit of a story about the whole exercise. So, like I've said, just like I run the SE team here in Druva, so my technical team's job is to provide that first experience with the customer to make it really look slick, very successful. And in the first deployment phase of this particular customer's environment, they compared us to an on-premise data protection solution, which currently they're spending 4 or 5 hours a week, one person just making sure it's running. They've got patching, they've got hardware to maintain. With our solution, with the Druva solution, he said, all I did is I just literally logged in, okay? I typed in one password and I was running. And me and the SEs have got a competition, who can get their customer backing up the first. So, don't want to be big-headed, of course, but I hold the record at 19 minutes. But the thing is that the whole point here is trying to make that first phase of not having any hardware on premise, being able to get up to speed very quickly, means that they can start thinking about reducing their footprint, their carbon footprint inside their data center. So no hardware to do data protection of any sort, no tape libraries, none of this. Everything moves to the cloud. So I think it's a really good idea to start there. And it does drive cost optimization so that they don't have to have, I mean, there was one example one customer gave, they still use tape. I expect that people in this audience still use tape. And what they do is they take the tapes out of tape library, they get a van, white van man comes along, picks them up, he drives it 200 miles or wherever it is to a safe place. Just think of the emissions that is causing, that whole process from A to B, okay? So this is something that we're reducing by the fact that there is no tapes, the data just travels straight into AWS, and hence we get a cost optimization there. We don't have to worry about things like patching, etc., and upgrades of hardware, patching, and all that sort of thing. And then it's the time to value. It starts at the end there with the fact that we are delivering a solution that ransomware cannot hit. We are delivering a solution that, which means obviously they're not using all those resources for ransomware. We're using something that basically the auditors and the CXOs are really thinking this is what we need to do because we need to do protection. And we're providing a visibility back so we can actually show them the savings that they're driving. Okay? So life cycles are everything. And one of the things that I think that I just wanted to show you about this point is just thinking about the future and scalability. What we don't want to do, and Ben did a great job talking about how Windows was affecting edge devices. We don't want to be growing edge devices all over the place. We want to be in a position where what we're going to do is use the minimum amount of resources on the minimum amount of servers. So we actually use something called microservices in order to run our business, which means we actually grow out very linearly across multiple servers inside AWS at very low cost. So again, we are very conscious of what we're doing. Now, I'm actually talking next month at the Gartner conference, talking about not just about our technology, but also about how we can go green as well. And they are looking at us as what we call a visionary. We just entered the Magic Quadrant. And they are kind of thinking about, guys, this company is really thinking about where they're going in the next few years, okay? And so similarly with Forrester, they're also seeing us as this leader who isn't just going out selling basically a service, which is what we're doing, but actually interacting with the customer base and actually talking about where they're going. And very similar to what one of the calculations Mike made earlier, there is a website you can go where you can work out, it's a calculator, and it works out your carbon emissions. And I think Mike made a good point about talking about what's called Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. Now, I'm very much going to talk about how Groove is going to help Scope 2 savings. So this is a little calculation I kind of made. So I thought, if I've got a couple of servers operating for 12 operating hours a day who are running traditional data protection with a PoE of probably about 1.6, okay? I run that, put that through the calculator, and knowing that AWS traditionally is driving 80% less carbon emissions than a normal data center, what I've worked out is basically the per year CO2 emissions, if you were to go for a Druva solution, is 80% less than on-premise, which basically we are saving just on those 2 servers being able to drive a company car or a family car, 2 cars, in fact, for 9,000 miles per year. Now, I do 10,000, so that means basically mine and my wife's car, I could run completely for free on that sort of thing. So this is the comparison that I think that when you start looking at data protection, what we call the last line of defense, cloud solutions can really deliver this effect and help you with your sustainability. And really pretty much closing off, what we've done is just, you have to put your basically money where your mouth is. So one of the things that we do within Druva is basically we give you what we call a $10 million guarantee, where if you follow basically our guidelines, we will actually guarantee our solution is obviously secure against ransomware, which again will reduce those emissions on the ransomware being used. And these are some component parts around that guarantee. Okay, it's just an idea that the fact we're so confident in our solution, this is what we're providing back to you. Now we've got, I'm just about to close off in a minute, but we're obviously later on, obviously me and Mike is over here from Druva. We're going to be down and around, walking around if you're interested in having a chat, discussion. But pretty much where I'm going to close out really is just that conversation with my son this morning. He says, Dad, what are you talking about today? It's really given me a different perspective on what I need to do as a vendor to help him and my daughter grow up into do what the things they want to do. So thanks everyone, I appreciate that time, but I would like to, anyone who wants to ask a question before I time out? Anyone got a hand?
Well, I'll spend Mike to come up anyway, and this is good.
Okay, fine.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Just wait for the guys to, just wait for the guys to get back up here. So thank you for all the speakers. As I said at the start, I want to take the opportunity to do a bit of Q&A. Unfortunately, Ed was paid per the hour, so we've let him go. We've got these guys here still. These guys wanted to be. Yeah, much better. So look, I wanted to take the opportunity. We've got about 5-10 minutes or so for Q&A before we head downstairs. I do have a question I want to ask the guys, but before that, is anybody else that has anything they want to do?
Yeah, just wondered, so you've all given us some ideas about how you can impact sustainability in our businesses. What more would you talk about what your own emissions are for your own businesses? Just wondered, have you got targets or any new carbon neutral regular?
So the main certification around that. So our own.
I'm going to repeat it just because I'm not sure it would have picked up on there. Yeah. So the question over here was, obviously we've talked a lot about what the guys can do and help your businesses, but in terms of their specific businesses themselves, what targets are they in place around carbon neutral and net zero?
So I suppose the big certification around this 14,001, isn't it, when it comes to certifying themselves or being certified to be carbon neutral is probably the wrong word, but to be environmentally conscious. So that's one of the things that we've absolutely done. One of the things that we're also looking at, which is more of a future-facing thing, is the idea of every license that somebody buys planting some trees. It's a nice message. It's a way of offsetting any of the development work that goes into building software in the first place. And it is more of a difficult conversation when it comes to software. I mean, if it was hardware that we were selling, it would be quite easy to sort of say this is the amount of hardware. But then putting a cost around each individual license, we find that probably the best way is to plant trees or give the customer a chance to plant trees for every single license. That's something we're looking at anyway afterwards. No one. I volunteered for that one, remember that.
And then just from a price standpoint, so I kind of touched on it at the start, so we are carbon neutral. Obviously we're not manufacturing kit or anything like that, so it's an easier target for us to hit. But there is an offset and an investment on trees that we're having to do to keep that neutral status within the business.
Okay. Yeah, just one chat about what we're doing. So we're effectively born out of an Indian-based company, and we've got Diwali coming up very soon at the end of October. And one of the things that we're doing is we're actually working to, when they do a lot of eating, a lot of food cooking, etc., we're actually going in, we're based in Pune in India, and what we're doing is going out and doing a lot of community cooking, let's just say. We're actually getting all our guys out there to help reduce the amount of cooking stoves that are running, getting everything obviously in one place, having the big like street party type thing. There's no driven flags or anything, guys. There's none of that. It's just the team actually helping, cooking towards that particular festival, and just trying to reduce some emissions during that, because that's something we're doing. Okay?
Right. Maybe a few words on some learnings as well. I talked initially about that our net zero target is approved by the Science-Based Target Initiative, which is some of the the gold standards you can certify that your targets are in line with achieving or kind of reducing the global warming, keeping it below 1.5 degrees. In the process of that, we also adjusted our wording a little bit. For example, I think one challenge there is for organizations to really understand how different vendors are talking about sustainability and about targets, because sometimes you find that the accounting is done a little bit different and things like that. So we, for example, only talk about net zero now for our 2040 goals, so achieving net zero across all 3 scopes, so our direct and indirect emissions. Before, we also mentioned that for our scope 1 and 2 and talked about net zero for scope 1 and 2. But according to SBTi, that's nothing that should be done. So we kind of standardize now to only use net zero. So maybe also learning there. But I think on a more smaller scale, also in local communities, I think every location is sort of doing also something for the local community. But I think if you want to know something more about this, it's all on our ESG hub. But I think the SBTi aspect, that was a big one for us.
Yeah, I think I mentioned the scopes very, very briefly. In terms of our products, I sort of talked a little bit to that, and they're really efficient with the rest of it. As an organisation, we're miles off. It's as simple as that. I think Ed mentioned it this morning, a lot of people were talking about it, not a lot of action really doing much about it. So we've dramatically improved ourselves over the last 3 years. And we've got the same sort of targets for FY40, but I think like a lot of organisations, we've still got a long way to go ourselves.
Okay, I'll close. I won't close on the question. I'm going to close with the feedback forms because I'll get my slack if I don't mention that. Final question from me. There's been huge amounts of information that we've heard today. I don't think I've ever seen so many slides in one presentation that Ed went through. So it is recorded. You'll be able to watch it back. But with that in mind, if there's kind of one key takeaway that you guys can go back to their offices and think about, what would that be from your recommendations?
No surprise from me. Manufacturing. Have a look at manufacturing. Usually the bus longer. It's so simple. That's it.
For me, it's just looking at data centres, not so much what's in it. That is obviously a component of pure, and that might be an important component of that. But just the efficiency of the data centre alone is something that needs a lot of focus.
I was just going to say that it's the whole 90% thing of data inside people's data centers that are not being touched. You save it, it just goes away. I think we as a vendor have a responsibility to make sure that we reduce the amount of data we protect, and we educate our customers to protect only what they need to.
Yeah, I think be ambitious with your targets. I think that's definitely something. So be visionary, to reduce the emissions. Have an aggressive goal for that, but also start small. Do something in the short term. Look at what you have today. Look at your IT racks and see if there are any old routers still running without any use for it. That's something I learned. Sometimes those things can consume incredible amount of energy. Also, I said, being more mindful when technology is required. Also, your laptop, we talked about end devices a lot today. Switching the laptop off at night, for example, how many of your employees are actually doing that? Because if it's not done, they run 24/7, the impact is a lot higher from end-user devices than it could be. So really, I think the behavioral element of that plays a big role. So yeah, start small and think big.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you for all your presentations earlier. It was a fantastic event. Really, really loved all of them. That'll be on LinkedIn in about 5 minutes.